So, has anybody ever wondered how either our parents or close relatives chose a game to give to us as a gift when we were a lot younger? This is something that I started to think about for a while, since in the earliest era of gaming, our close relatives were able to pick games out for us and know that we were going to like them. Since I figured that this was something that I couldn't answer on my own, the only way for me to get an answer to this question of mine was to ask the one person who introduced me to video games when I was just a kid, my father. I essentially asked him the following: "Hey Dad, when my brother and I were kids, how was it that you made a decision on which games you would purchase and know that we would like them?" And his response was the following: "Well, I would make my decision from what I would see in the game's front cover art, then read the back cover's description of the game and connect it with the things both you and your brother would always show interest at." I could definitely understand what he meant by his response, especially since back in the early 2000s, gaming was still just getting started and there weren't that many websites to access reviews of games. So a lot of the decision making would solely have to be based on what the person would see at first glance. Of course, in the current state that gaming's at right now, with a shift to digital format and now being able to access any reviews and gameplay videos in the internet, choosing games has become a lot easier than it was before. But from a more casual point of view, like my father's, I personally still think that having both good front and back cover arts make an impact on what games they may choose for our experience when not seeing anything from it. I essentially decided to test this out using my own game collection and asking someone else to pick out 5 games out of all the games I had available. And since I already knew that she wasn't aware of what each game was just by looking at the title, it was a good way to see why she went with those decisions. The only factors for this experiment was that she was only able to pick out those 5 games based solely on what she saw from the front and back cover of the game's art. Since she also isn't fluent in both speaking and reading in English, reading the back cover's description was off the table for her. Second, she wasn't allowed to ask me about any details of what the game's plot was. I would only provide that information for her after she had already told me the reason why she chose those games. And finally, she would have to choose 3 games out of the 5 she had selected, and then have to choose only 1 game out of those 3. This was to see what her process of elimination was if she was only able to play 1 game. The 5 games she chose alongside the reason behind it were the following. Do note that these will be placed in the order that they were eliminated, leaving the last game as the one she would have played first. Number 5 was Code Vein. She chose this game due to thinking that some events had occurred in the game setting, causing a virus outbreak that needed to be purged. Number 4 was Castlevania Requiem, Symphony of the Night / Rondo of Blood. She chose this game due to the artwork and attractive characters that were presented to her at first glance. Number 3 was Okami. She picked this one because of the unique paintbrush art style that's shown and her being fond of wolves. Number 2 was Bloodborne. She picked this one due to the setting of the game looking like the Victorian era and looking like you were going to take on beasts. And number 1 was Elden Ring. This one was pretty straightforward. She picked this one due to reminding her of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. With the reasons she had provided me, she wasn't too off on some of the game's plots, solely basing it off on what impression she got just by seeing both the front and back covers of each game. I did mention this to her after she had provided me with the explanation for each choice of game she made. But it also made me think of something else, now that digital games are starting to rise. Although digital games still show artwork for the game, I do notice that some digital games only feature the front cover art for most games that are released physically as well, while some feature artwork that isn't seen in the physical version and vice versa. I do think that this is a trade-off that makes choosing a game a little more difficult if you remove reading the description and just basing your first decision off of the initial image that's presented to you. Speaking from my own experience when browsing through the available digital games, there are times in which I won't take a look at what a game is if the artwork that's presented in its digital format doesn't appeal to me at first glance. This also applies to any physical games that are available at either the local or online stores that feature the front cover of a game. The only difference that brings my attention to a game more in their physical format when browsing through them in person is that I do have immediate access to the back cover's artwork upon picking them up. In terms of the description in the back cover of the physical game, I do see that some players, including myself, don't really pay attention to these and only focus on what other artwork is presented before reading the actual description of the game that pique your interest. But I will give credit to a good game's description that manages to keep you thinking about what will be in store for you when either driving back home or while installing it. And on the flip side, there are other games descriptions that are extremely bland and don't really describe what the game's about, already expecting the player to know what the game should be about, which can work if you're already a longtime fan of an ongoing series. But although a game's back cover alongside its description, and sometimes trailers if browsing digitally, may be one of the best provided, many will choose to ignore this if their initial reaction to a game's front cover art isn't a good one. Of course, nowadays, this decision can change for each individual person if they're already exposed to either a review or gameplay before making the decision to either give the game a go or skip it. But that initial reaction you get upon seeing the front cover art of a game still makes an impact if you decide to look further into the game. This makes me both reflect and understand what my father meant on how he made decisions on what games to gift my brother and I when we were kids. And with the rise in people choosing to play video games as a hobby, I still think that having both good front and back cover art can pique the interest of someone that's either new to the hobby or help someone in choosing what game they would give to someone as a gift. And if there's one thing I can take from how my father selected games, is that all of us as players end up judging a game by its cover, whether we are aware of it or not. And now, I wish to open up the discussion to you with this question. Have there been any games that you chose to try out solely on what you were presented with in the game's front and back cover? If your answer is yes, share with me which one it was. If not, here's the alternative. Share with me a game that was chosen for you by someone else and what made them choose that game for you. For me, I can definitely say that I have chosen plenty of games I currently have in my library due to what I saw in the front cover. One was the very first Infamous on the PS3, and another was Shadows of the Damned. There are probably many other games I have made a decision to try out solely based on what I see at first glance, but I probably don't remember on which ones I did back then. But hey, I look forward to hearing from you as well. Well, this was probably the shortest video I have done sharing my thoughts about something I was curious about. But hey, if you made it this far, why not check out any of the previous videos that are already created? Any extra feedback that I could use to further improve these videos would be extremely appreciated. I hope to see you around in the next video and have a great end of 2024.